Hello, my name is Maya, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, my family had a nickname for me, the boring sibling. It was a label they applied with a sort of affectionate pity, a gentle pat on the head for the quiet daughter who always colored inside the lines. My brother, Leo, was the star, the sun around which our family orbited. He was the charismatic stock trader, their financial genius. They pinned all their hopes and dreams on him, while I was just Maya. Steady, frugal, predictable Maya. They were right about one thing. I was predictable. But they never could have predicted that my boring life would one day be the only thing standing between them and total ruin. They certainly never imagined that the day they came to me, broken and desperate, I would be the one holding all the cards. They came asking for a lifeline, but what they got was a lesson that would shatter their entire world. Before I dive into the story of how my family's greatest crisis became my quietest, most profound victory, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Drop a comment down below and let me know. And if you've ever felt underestimated or overlooked by the people who are supposed to believe in you the most, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And for all the new faces here, make sure you subscribe to join our community of storytellers and survivors. Now, let's get into it. My entire childhood was a masterclass in contrasts, a perfectly balanced diorama of favoritism. The roles were assigned early and never questioned. Leo was the golden child, destined for greatness, and I was the sensible, background-hued wallpaper against which his brilliance could shine. I remember one summer when I was 9 and Leo was 11. I had spent a week meticulously planning a lemonade stand. I researched the best recipe, calculated the cost of lemons and sugar down to the penny, and even created a rudimentary marketing plan involving flyers for our neighbors' mailboxes. I did all the work, squeezing lemons until my hands were raw and sticky. On the day of the sale, Leo, with his megawatt smile and effortless charm, took over as the frontman. He charmed the neighbors, told jokes, and flirted with the older girls who walked by. At the end of the day, our cash box was full. Our parents, Richard and Eleanor, came out to see the results. My father clapped Leo on the back, his voice booming with pride. "Look at this boy, Eleanor. A natural-born entrepreneur. He's going to be a millionaire before he's 30. Leo beamed, taking a dramatic bow. My mother hugged him tightly. "Oh, our little genius." They looked over at me, covered in lemon pulp and sweat, and my mother smiled a placid, distant smile. "And thank you for helping your brother, Maya. It's good to be supportive." Helping him, as if I were his assistant, not the architect of the entire venture. That night, Leo was allowed to keep half the profits as a commission, and our parents took him out for ice cream to celebrate his business acumen. I was told to put my half into my piggy bank. "You're the saver, sweetie," my father said, ruffling my hair. "Every family needs a saver." It wasn't a compliment, it was a consolation prize. This pattern calcified as we grew older. Birthdays were a stark reminder of our designated places. One year, for my 13th birthday, I received a $50 savings bond from my parents. It came with a lecture about the importance of planning for the future. "This will be worth $100 when it matures, Maya," my father explained, as if bestowing a great secret of the universe. It's the magic of compound interest. For his 15th birthday 2 months later, Leo received a top-of-the-line racing bike that cost nearly 10 times as much. When I quietly pointed out the disparity to my mother, she just looked confused. "But Maya, honey, it's different. Leo is active. He's out there making friends, building connections. You like to read. The bond is a sensible gift for you." The implication was clear. His life was lived in vibrant, expensive color, while mine was a sensible, grayscale ledger. The library, my sanctuary from the boisterous world of Leo, became my true teacher. While he was out building his connections at parties, I was devouring books on economics, personal finance, and investing. I wasn't obsessed with money itself, but with the concept of security, of building a foundation that no one could take away from me. At 16, I got a part-time job shelving books at that same library. The pay was meager, but I treated every dollar like a seed. I opened my first custodial investment account with $100 painstakingly saved from my paychecks. I remember trying to explain my strategy to my family one evening at the dinner table. I had just finished reading a book about long-term, passive investing in low-cost index funds. My eyes were probably shining with the thrill of discovery. "It's amazing," I said. "If you just consistently invest and let the dividends reinvest, the growth over 30 or 40 years is exponential. It's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market." I looked around the table, hoping for a spark of interest. My father chuckled, a deep, condescending rumble. "Look at our little bean counter, Richard," my mother said, smiling at my dad. Leo rolled his eyes dramatically. "Maya, that's so slow. That's for old people. The real money is in making smart, fast moves. You have to be bold." My father nodded in agreement.
"Leo's right.
"Leave the big money stuff to your brother, sweetie. He just gets it. You stick to your books." I felt a familiar hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I closed my mouth and quietly went back to eating my mashed potatoes. The message was, as always, unambiguous. My world was small, my ideas were cute, and the real, important business of life was Leo's domain. This dynamic only intensified in adulthood. Leo, true to his persona, landed a high-stakes job as a stock trader at a boutique firm. His early career was a string of spectacular wins, or so he told us. He would hold court at family dinners, spinning tales of market volatility, of shorting a falling knife, and riding a bull to the moon. He spoke in a language of puts, calls, and derivatives that our parents didn't understand but were deeply impressed by. It sounded like the language of power, of genius. He bought a flashy German sports car, wore tailored suits that cost more than my monthly rent, and brought extravagant gifts to every family gathering. He was living proof of his own hype. Meanwhile, I had pursued a far less glamorous path. I became a certified public accountant. My work was methodical, detail-oriented, and, in my family's eyes, profoundly boring. I drove a reliable, 5-year-old sedan, lived in a modest apartment, and my idea of a splurge was buying organic vegetables at the farmer's market. My contributions to family dinner conversations, which usually revolved around tax code changes or the benefits of a Roth versus a traditional IRA, were met with polite nods and swift changes of subject. "Oh, Maya, still counting those beans?" Leo would quip, and the table would erupt in gentle laughter at my expense. I learned to stay quiet, to let Leo have the stage. It was easier than facing the casual dismissal. The tipping point, the moment that set our family on a collision course with disaster, came on my father's 64th birthday. We were at a ridiculously expensive restaurant that Leo had chosen and was, of course, paying for. After the main course, as the dessert menus were being passed around, Leo cleared his throat and made an announcement. He had convinced our parents, Richard and Eleanor, to let him take over the management of their entire retirement portfolio. The money they had diligently saved over 40 years of my father's career as an engineer and my mother's as a teacher. "It's time we start thinking about real generational wealth," Leo proclaimed, his voice filled with self-importance. "The money Dad and Mom have saved is great, but it's just sitting there, getting lazy. I'm going to put it to work. I'm going to turn their nest egg into a legacy." I felt a cold knot of dread form in the pit of my stomach. I knew Leo's style. He wasn't an investor. He was a high roller. He chased risk like a drug. "Dad, Mom," I began, trying to keep my voice even. "What's the strategy? Is it diversified? You shouldn't have all your assets in high-risk equities, especially this close to retirement." My voice was calm, my question reasonable, but the reaction was immediate and defensive. "Oh, Maya, don't be such a worrywart," my mother said, waving a dismissive hand. "Your brother is a professional. He knows things we don't." My father patted my hand, his expression a mixture of paternal condescension and annoyance. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, Maya. This is men's business. Leo knows what he's doing. He's taking care of all of us now." He smiled at Leo, a look of pure, unadulterated pride on his face. "He's going to make us all rich." I looked at Leo, who gave me a tiny, triumphant smirk from across the table. In that moment, I wasn't just the boring sibling anymore. I was the Cassandra of the family, the prophet of doom they refused to hear. I excused myself from the table and went to the restroom, my hands shaking. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and saw the futility of it all. They didn't want my advice. They wanted the dream Leo was selling them. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that they were going to pay a very high price for it. The first cracks in Leo's glittering facade appeared subtly. He had always been the life of the party, but now a frantic energy buzzed just beneath his skin. He was perpetually attached to his phone, his thumb scrolling furiously through stock tickers, his jaw tight. He skipped my mother's birthday dinner, a cardinal sin in our family, with a terse excuse about a volatile market event that required his full attention. The lavish gifts that had once been his trademark ceased. For Christmas that year, he gave everyone generic gift cards, a stark contrast to the designer watches and weekend getaways of years past. The excuse was that his capital was tied up in a once-in-a-lifetime position that was about to pay off massively. They believed him, of course. They always believed him. Then one Tuesday afternoon, he called me. His voice, usually so confident and booming, was a notch quieter, strained. "Hey, May," he started, the forced casualness setting my teeth on edge. "Listen, could you do me a huge favor? I've got a bit of a temporary liquidity issue. Just some funds clearing. Could you spot me a few thousand? Just to tide me over for a week. Don't worry Mom and Dad with it. You know how they get." A liquidity issue. The classic euphemism. My mind, the orderly accountant's mind they so often mocked, screamed at me. This was a red flag the size of a billboard. But the ingrained family dynamics, the lifetime of being the supportive one, were a powerful force. "How much, Leo?" I asked, my voice flat. He named a sum that was far from trivial. A part of me, the cold, logical part, wanted to say no, to demand answers. But another, older part, the part that still craved a crumb of familial value, took over. I transferred the money, knowing with absolute certainty it was not a loan, but a final, foolish offering to the god of our family's delusion. I knew I would never see it again. Over the next few months, the atmosphere in my parents' home grew heavy and strange. The house I grew up in, a place once filled with my father's booming laughter and the scent of my mother's baking, now felt like a library waiting for a final, overdue notice. They started making comments about cutting back and being more sensible, phrases I had championed for years and been mocked for. Now, on their lips, they sounded foreign and panicked. They claimed they were reinvesting for a bigger payoff, that Leo was making a strategic play that required them to be lean and mean for a short while. It was all nonsense, and I think on some level they knew it. During one visit, while looking for a pen in the mail holder by the door, my fingers brushed against a thick, windowed envelope. The bold, red letters were stark against the white. Past due notice. I felt my blood run cold. I pushed aside a stack of bills and catalogs and found another, and then another. Notice of intent to foreclose. They weren't just cutting back. They were drowning. I confronted my father that evening, holding one of the letters in my trembling hand. "Dad, what is this? I thought you paid off the house years ago." His face, usually so open and cheerful, contorted into a mask of rage and shame. "Where did you get that?" he boomed, snatching the letter from my hand. "Are you snooping in our mail now? This is our house, Maya. This is a private matter." "It's a foreclosure notice, Dad." "That's not a private matter. It's a catastrophe." I shot back, my voice rising. "Your son, the genius, has this completely under control," he snarled, his face inches from mine. "This is just a paperwork mix-up. You're just trying to stir up trouble because you've always been jealous of your brother's success." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Jealous. After all my years of quiet warnings, of genuine concern, that was all he could see. He stuffed the letter in his pocket. "I'm not discussing this with you again. It's handled." He turned his back on me, ending the conversation, and in that moment, I felt a profound shift inside me. The hurt was still there, a familiar ache, but it was being rapidly overtaken by a cold, hard anger. They had made their choice. They had chosen the fantasy over reality, the charlatan over the Cassandra. And the bill was coming due. The final call came late on a Wednesday night. It wasn't my father's angry bellow or Leo's strained bravado. It was my mother's voice, thin and shattered, a sound I had never heard before. "Maya," she whispered, her words punctuated by ragged sobs. "Can you come over? It's all gone, Maya. Everything is gone." The carefully constructed fantasy had finally, completely imploded. I drove over in a state of grim calm. The scene in the living room was one of utter devastation. The foreclosure notices I had found were no longer hidden. They were scattered across the coffee table like funeral lilies. My father, the proud patriarch, was slumped in his armchair, looking 100 years old. His face was gray, the skin sagging, his eyes vacant. My mother was curled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, her body shaking with silent sobs. And Leo was a ghost. He was pale and gaunt, his expensive suit hanging off his shrunken frame. The charismatic, confident genius was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell of a man who couldn't meet my eyes. He was the one who finally spoke, his voice a hoarse rasp. He confessed everything. There was no once-in-a-lifetime position. There was no strategic play. He had taken all of it, their retirement savings, the money from the second mortgage on their home, every liquid asset they had, and leveraged it on a series of incredibly risky, deeply speculative derivative trades. It was a Hail Mary pass to cover earlier, smaller losses he had hidden from them. But the market had turned against him. It wasn't just a loss, it was a total wipeout. Annihilation. "I thought I could fix it," he mumbled, staring at the floor. "I just needed one more win, just one." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. My mother's quiet weeping was the only thing that punctuated the thick, suffocating despair. My father finally stirred, looking not at Leo, the source of their ruin, but at me. His eyes, once so dismissive, were now filled with a desperate, grasping hope. "Maya," he said, his voice a reedy whisper. You've always been so responsible. So frugal." The word, once an insult, was now a desperate prayer. "You have a little something set aside, don't you? An emergency fund." My mother looked up, her face tear-streaked and pleading. "We just need enough to stop the foreclosure, honey. Just to get back on our feet." The assumption was breathtaking in its arrogance. After a lifetime of mockery, they now turned to me, their boring, bean-counting daughter, assuming I had squirreled away a few $1,000s in a coffee can, a modest safety net they could use and discard. "We'll pay you back, of course," my father added, his voice lacking any conviction. "As soon as Leo gets back on his feet." Even now, even at rock bottom, their world still revolved around him. They weren't asking me for a favor. They were expecting me to fulfill my designated role, the sensible, reliable backup plan. They looked at me, the three of them, their faces a portrait of ruin and expectation. And in that moment, the last vestiges of the hurt, quiet little girl died. Something new, something cold and clear and powerful, settled in its place. The air in the living room was thick with the scent of stale fear and my mother's dying potpourri. It was the smell of collapse. My father, my mother, and my brother, the three people who had defined the narrow confines of my world for so long, stared at me. Their expressions were a grotesque mix of shame, desperation, and naked, grasping entitlement. They saw me not as a person, but as a function, a last-ditch solution they had long ignored but now desperately needed. I let the silence stretch, a deliberate, calculated pause. I watched the hope in their eyes curdle into confusion, then into a flicker of panic. My calmness was unnatural. It was not the reaction they expected from the emotional, overly sensitive daughter. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the stale water from the glass on the end table. Finally, I set the glass down with a soft click that sounded like a gavel in the funereal quiet. I looked directly at my father. "How much?" My voice was devoid of emotion, a clinical inquiry. It was the voice I used with clients, not with family. The question seemed to startle him. He stammered, fumbling with one of the letters on the table. Well, the bank, the immediate payment to stop the proceedings is. He couldn't say the number. Leo, still staring at the carpet, mumbled it. 175,000. And that's just the house. My father flinched, then added quickly, and we need a little for living expenses. Until we can figure things out. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading. We know it's a lot, honey. It's too much to ask, I know, but we have nowhere else to turn. They waited for my reaction. For tears, for shock, for a regretful shaking of my head. They were prepared for my inability to help, which would, in a strange way, absolve them. It would just be another tragedy. They were not prepared for what I did next. I said nothing. I simply reached down into my practical, boring tote bag and pulled out my laptop. I placed it on my lap and opened it. They watched me, their brows furrowed. They probably thought I was going to check my online banking to see if by some miracle I had a few $1,000s to spare for my meager accountant's salary. My fingers moved quickly and surely across the keyboard. I wasn't logging into a simple checking account. I was logging into a comprehensive wealth management portal, the kind they had only ever seen in glossy brochures Leo used to leave lying around. I typed in my password, passed the two-factor authentication, and the main dashboard loaded. It was a clean, professional interface filled with pie charts, performance graphs, and asset allocation data. And at the very top, in a large, bold font, was the total portfolio value. A number with a $sign, 7 digits, and 2 commas. I turned the laptop around and placed it on the coffee table, facing them. The screen cast a pale, blue light on their stunned faces. Silence. My father squinted, leaning forward. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Leo's had finally snapped up from the floor, his eyes widening in disbelief. What is that? Eleanor whispered, her voice a thread of sound. Is that real? I let the question hang in the air for another long moment before I spoke. My voice was still quiet, but it now carried the weight of years of unspoken truths. This, I said, gesturing to the screen, is what boring looks like. This is the result of saving 30% of my income every single month since I was 16 years old. This is the power of compound interest you lectured me about with that $50 savings bond, Dad. This is what happens when you live below your means, ignore hot tips from geniuses, and invest patiently and consistently in low-cost, diversified index funds for 16 years. I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze lingering on Leo. This isn't magic. It's math. It's discipline. It's everything this family claimed to value but never, ever practiced. The shock in the room was a physical thing. It was absolute and profound. They were not just looking at a number on a screen, they were looking at the complete demolition of their entire belief system. The boring one, the bean counter, the risk-averse little mouse, was the wealthy one, and the genius was the fool who had set fire to everything. 6 months after the day my world had been turned upside down, a fragile stability had settled over the family. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was irrevocably altered. The panic was gone, replaced by a quiet, sometimes strained, routine. The house was secure. The bills were paid on time, automatically, from an account my parents never saw. They lived on their allowance and, to my surprise, they were managing. My father had even taken up gardening, finding satisfaction in cultivating something tangible and real. Leo was the most changed. The destruction of his ego had been total. He lost his flashy car, his expensive apartment, and his career. He now worked at a local hardware store, stocking shelves and mixing paint. The work was honest and humbling. The arrogance was gone, scoured out of him by failure. One evening, after I had dropped off some groceries, he stopped me on the porch. He looked thin and tired, but his eyes were clear for the first time in years. Maya, he said, his voice quiet. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for the money. For everything. For how he treated you. I was a fool. A stupid, arrogant fool. The apology was broken, incomplete, but it was the most honest thing I had ever heard him say. I simply nodded. I know, Leo. There was nothing more to say. Forgiveness was a complex terrain I wasn't ready to navigate, but acceptance? That felt possible. Our family dynamic was unrecognizable from what it had been. The old roles of genius and boring sibling were blasted to dust. I was now, in effect, the matriarch. My authority was absolute, not because I was cruel, but because I was competent. My wealth was a topic we never discussed, but it was a silent, powerful presence that underpinned the New World Order. They no longer saw me as just frugal. They saw me as wise. The relationship wasn't warm. It wasn't the cozy family ideal you see in movies, but it was real. It was built not on delusions and favoritism, but on a foundation of hard truths and newly defined boundaries. They respected me, not because they loved me more, but because they had no other choice. It was a respect born of necessity, but it was respect nonetheless, and for me it was a start. The great irony was that I never set out for revenge. I didn't orchestrate their downfall or wish for it. I simply prepared for a storm I knew was coming. My actions weren't about punishing them. They were about establishing order from chaos. It was about saving them from the consequences of their own choices and, in the process, freeing myself from the suffocating role of the invisible daughter. The power wasn't in the millions of dollars in my account. I had been a multimillionaire for years and still felt small in their presence. The true power, the true validation, came in the moment I looked them in their desperate eyes and calmly, firmly, stated my terms. In the end, I realized I hadn't just saved my family's home. I had saved them from the destructive path they were on. I forced them to confront the truth, to learn humility, and to live in reality instead of a high-risk fantasy. And in doing so, I finally saved myself. I was no longer the gray, boring wallpaper. I was the architect of my own life, and now there's two. The greatest return on my investment wasn't the number on a screen. It was the quiet, unshakable confidence that settled in my soul. It was the knowledge that my worth was never determined by their opinion of me. It was mine all along, patiently compounding in the background, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. I hope my story can be a source of strength for anyone out there who feels unseen or undervalued. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? I would be honored if you shared your story in the comments below. Let's build a community where our quiet strengths are celebrated. Please don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding your power in the most unexpected places. Thank you so much for joining me and for listening to my journey. Remember that your value is inherent. It isn't granted by others. It is built by you, for you, one steady, boring day at a time.